Hello and welcome to the fourth of our Urgent Conversations webinars. I'm Ben McCabe, I'm the Marketing Manager at Resource Futures, and I'm joined today by a plurality of paint sector experts to discuss how we can find circular solutions for the paint industry. From Resource Futures, we have our Circular Economy Lead, Anne Stevenson, as well as our Communities Project Manager, Jude King. They are joined today by Neil Ogilvie from the Painting and Decorating Association and Ben McClelland from PaintCare. Welcome, Jude, Neil, Anne, and Ben. Right. Before we get going, I just want to give you guys the opportunity to introduce yourselves briefly. So let's start with Ben.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Ben McClelland. I'm the Operations Manager for PaintCare. PaintCare has been set up by the BCF to investigate and create solutions for a paint take-back scheme for leftover paint in the UK. We're currently working on a pilot at the moment to test the take back through various stores within the West Midlands. We're looking to see what learnings we get from that and see if it's a viable solution for something in the future, to be able to take the leftover paint in the UK through to the reuse and remanufacture sector in the future.
Well, there, hi, I'm Neil Ogilvie. I'm the Chief Executive of the Painting and Decorating Association. Our trade body has been representing the sector now since 1894. We are the only government-recognised trade body for the painting sector. Our members are ranging from the sole traders, the SMEs, up to the large national contractors. We've started our Paint Green Initiative in 2022 just to try and make sure that the awareness for our members to start doing their bit for the sector, with the recycling of paint and the cans. Our aim is to not only just get it out to our members, but also try and get it out to a wider audience and make sure that the paint and the recycling of cans is compliant for the future.
Hi everyone. I'm the Circular Economy Lead at Resource Futures. What does that mean? It means that we're helping manufacturers and their supply chain, which does include the paint industry overall, helping them navigate and find those practical solutions to often quite complex challenges through identifying and prioritising circularity and sustainable practices throughout the value chain. And so that can range from just understanding what's what at the moment to making sense of the data you've got or what data is needed to make changes. And it's all the way through to co-creating those pragmatic action plans for the individual organisation or as a sector as a whole. And sort of those real world ESG strategies that sort of helps build that resilience within the industry and predominantly help to reduce those sort of cost pressures and to make you just more secure moving forward.
So I'm Jude. I'm the Communities Project and Development Manager at Resource Futures. Within our communities section, we have 7 long-running community action projects, one of which is Community Repaint, which I project manage. So I'm here with my Community Repaint hat on. We are a nationwide reuse network engaging local authorities, waste management companies, community organisations and individual people with paintbrushes to encourage reuse within the sector.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. Lovely to have you all here. And I wanted to start by talking a little bit about the sustainability issues and barriers that the sector is facing, because there's some that are quite unique to the paint sector, and then there are others that are a little bit more common across all industries. And let's start with you with a bit more of an overview. What are you seeing as the primary sustainability challenges that are affecting companies and organisations within the paint sector?
We probably all agree that at the moment, the painting and decorating sector is in a bit of panic stations mode. Market uncertainties, changing and stronger regulation, major supply chain concerns, and customers potentially resistant to absorbing necessary price rises, reflecting what's happening in the world, the sort of bigger picture geopolitics. All of that is outside of the control of all the businesses who are operating in the sector. But what I will say is that recognising that fragility and cost and environmental burdens of the business as usual way of thinking, I think the sector is starting to build resilience, and I'd sort of frame that on two fronts. The first in terms of collaborating more to address those increasing costs of responsible waste management that are rising faster than margins in the sector, and that's where things like BCF PaintCare are really driving that forward. And secondly, I really do think that the industry is getting ahead of the game in not only ensuring their products are safer and highly functional, but also being sustainable by design. and ensuring things like paint packs and kettles and products are not only technically recyclable, but are actually recycled in practice, where things like community repaint can really help. But also importantly, the people who are using these products, like the painters and decorators, know the choices that are available to them. And that's sort of demonstrated by the Paint Green scheme. But I think the others have got a lot more to say on those things.
Knowledge is often a key barrier to sustainable action being taken, both when it comes to consumers making the right choices and also by those working in the sector knowing what to do. How far do you think that rings true for the painting and decorating sector specifically?
I think it's absolutely true. I think a lot of decorators out there, when we speak to our members, a lot of them now are signing up to the Paint Repeat. It's been a slow start, but they are now starting to sign up. I think speaking to the wider audience out there, I think a lot of the larger metal contractors, they understand how the recycling works, what's available out there for them, whether it's to repaint or Paint 360. I think a lot of the smaller contractors, this might sound disrespectful, but I think a lot of them don't actually realise what's out there for them, the actual area where they can go to take not only the paint but their cans back, and educating these non-PDA members about what they can do for environment sustainability. With Paint Green now, that is growing. Even though we've only got less than 40 members, we have seen quite a large growth in that over the last 12 months, and I think it's just majorly trying to get the word out there. We know there's a lot of small contractors out there, more than the bigger contractors, who actually, as I said earlier, do not understand or realise that there is these areas, as Anne said, out there where they can take the opportunity to actually share, spread the word amongst their painting communities for the recycling of the paint, the cans and the plastics.
Unwanted and wasted paint is the elephant in the room a lot of the time when it comes to sustainability. Estimates suggest that there's up to 50 million litres are being wasted each year just in the UK. Do you think this challenge is more one of recovering the material, or is it about finding pathways for reuse?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, the 50 million litres number is one that's bandied about a lot. It might be massively more than that or a lot less, but we take that as the sort of standard to give you an idea of the size of the problem. Community Repaint as a project has been running for 30 years, so has had quite a good vision of what's been going on within reuse over those decades. And I would say we have a double-faced challenge. One of them is we need to grow our network big enough and have enough options for reuse around the country that when somebody hears about it, it's on their doorstep and convenient. And we need people to understand that actually paint is entirely reusable. I think there's around 400 million litres of paint sold new a year in this country. Actually, with Community Repaint, every year we redistribute around 300,000 litres, about a thousandth or thereabouts of the total amount that's bought. So actually, paint reuse isn't going to affect the paint industry's bottom line. So it is something that we need to promote more widely. But in order to promote more widely, we need to have it available and convenient, because it certainly is a much cheaper option for individuals. So, I think the awareness of reuse as a whole within every sector is getting greater. And I think, with the engagement we've had with painters and decorators who contact us looking for somewhere to take their paint, I really do think the industry is looking to move in the right direction. And even your one man, no van, one paint pot is still happier to have a green solution than to throw stuff in the bin.
How far along is the UK in terms of dealing with paint waste compared to other parts of the world? And what can we learn from other countries that are also trying to deal with the problem?
We all have the same problem. What do you do with that paint? Is there sufficient volume, or what is the volume that can go into reuse? What can go into remanufacture? It's a volume and scale thing. I think it's the education to consumers and contractors and painters and decorators that they have dedicated places to return it. There's challenges, again, like I say, they are worldwide. Everybody faces the same issues in the creation of dedicated drop-off points. How do you communicate that to the people? It's okay to reusing the paint. One of the greatest ways of doing it is the cheapest ways to deal with the paint. But is it sufficient amount of capacity within that reuse sector to actually take all of the paint that's available out there in the industries? So you then have to look towards a remanufacturer. How many places around the world and in the UK can you remanufacture? There's some great facilities in the UK. You've got Paint 360, there's Recipro, and there's several more around the UK that can handle the remanufacturing of paint. But again, there's a lid on the capacity. And I think everybody around the world, from the conversations that we've had with the various countries, we've all got the same challenges, and we're all aiming to get to the same point, which is to do the right thing and create sustainable solutions, tapping into existing networks to make the message right and do the right thing with the paint and packaging.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because while it's the same problems, there's not always the same tools available. For example, the situation in the US legally is a little bit different in terms of requirements for producers and people using paint.
Yeah, so there's different aspects. So in Canada, for example, they have what was the original PaintCare scheme, where they started to look into the networks, and this was 10 or 15 years ago. So they've gone through a lot of the systems and created the network to be able to create the systems to get the paint back in, and wasn't government led. So we moved to America, and it's run state by state, and there's a legal requirement for PaintCare to be active within certain states and to take minimum volumes and to take actual different products within each of those regions and have a minimum amounts that they can guarantee to take back. And then you look to other countries like Australia with paint back. I mean, Australia, as we all know, is a massive country, but they manage it with 169 actual drop-off points, which compared to what we're trying to do in the UK, where we're looking at anything up to about 2,000 drop-off points, the scale's very, very different. But again, it's not a requirement by government. And what we're doing with PaintCare is, before this is a requirement put in place by government that the paint has to be handled and the rules are set by government, we're trying to do it for and on behalf of the industry, the manufacturers, the reuse sector and the remanufacturing, to make it work in the UK, so that it's run by the right people rather than somebody sat in government making choices about an industry that they don't necessarily understand.
Do we have the demand to deal with the volume that actually could potentially be coming in? And I think that is a problem, and that is a big behaviour change piece, again, with understanding reuse. I was also going to make mention to the remanufacturing process. So within our network, we have 2 organisations who remanufacture paint, and there are more in the UK as well, 360 amongst others. That process is basically taking the half tins of leftover paint and running it through a process to produce a nearly product. And this is a really good solution, because what you have is something that people would be more willing to pick off the shelf. So that sort of solves that consumer battle with not having a brand new, nice looking thing to buy.
With our members, we find now that because of the price of paint, raw materials, that speaking to some of our members, if they get quite a large job, whereas before they would say, well, shall we leave the paint with the customer? I think the BCF said that within the public there's so many thousands of litres of paint that's left in sheds and garages. That's not from the trade. What we're finding now is that speaking to the painters, they are definitely saying that cost of paint, the client is requesting that the cans of paint, it's only a small amount, is left up for touch-up or maybe damage on walls or skeleton boards. Whereas before, maybe the painter would have maybe removed the paint from the job, maybe disposed of that in the community repaints or accounts for recycling, or even maybe taking it back to their workshop. And then over the years, they get huge amounts of paint left in their workshops. So that has adjusted now with the cost of paint. They are saying that the client is saying, look, we've paid for the materials, we've paid for the paint for the job. So rather than you take it away, can you please make sure that's left with the client? But then again, obviously, if it's a water-based paint and if it's stored outside in a garage or a shed in cold conditions for a couple of 3 years, that paint's useless. The emulsions are separated and hardened. So it's then, how do we educate the members of the public to make sure it's kept within the right temperatures or to dispose within the right time? So if we need to reuse that paint, it's not just turned into a solid block.
Moving on from barriers and limitations we're seeing, I wanted to focus on the existing schemes, initiatives and action that are currently being taken on across the sector. I think, Ben, this is probably a good place to start with you, because obviously PaintCare is quite a recent initiative within the sector.
Yeah, that's something we're learning all the time, is what's out there, who's doing what. I think there's a lot more out there in and around the country of people with reuse schemes, with certain amounts of remanufacturing as well. I'm discovering more literally on a weekly basis. As PaintCare, we're trying to join all the dots, trying to find that solution that links up the logistics with the people that can reuse the paint, to work alongside community repaint, create that network of understanding of what capacity there is out there. There's a place in mid Wales which I heard about recently. I know they're remanufacturing paint, but they don't seem to be on the radar as such. And maybe that's one of the points of PaintCare is to raise the profile, help everybody raise their profiles, to understand and create some knowledge and understanding of what reuse is. I don't think it's out there enough.
Because PaintCare isn't meant to be a replacement to existing schemes, is it? It's meant to complement what's already out.
Not at all. We're looking to support both the industry itself, the manufacturers, the painters and decorators, to have solutions, as Neil said, for the paints, education for consumers. I mean, in an ideal world, we'll be able to teach consumers to buy the right amount of paint, to use exactly the right amount of paint, and then we start having a different conversation, and we're just purely talking about predominantly packaging and how we deal with the packaging, which I'm sure we'll come on to later on.
What sort of timeline are you looking at with PaintCare at the moment in terms of its implementation?
So PaintCare has been on the tail for approximately just over 10 years. It's taken some time to get everybody around the table to agree to how things will work and how things will run. We did a HWRC, a household waste recycling centre trial a couple of years ago, and that was successful. So what we're doing now is what we're calling a retail take back, so we can understand how we can tap into existing logistics within existing networks within the manufacturers and retailers. We're also doing some small elements with some of the national painting contractors to understand their volumes. Currently, we're at a stage where we are gathering the data to understand how we can grow this into a national scheme. Along with that, we're also working with remanufacturers in the UK, Recipro up in the Wirral, and talking to the experts out there to understand what we need to do to get going and start rolling this out into a national scheme. Timeline wise, I can't put an exact date on it. We're hoping once we've completed this Midlands trial that we're doing at the moment, which has approximately 7 weeks left to run through to the end of June, maybe potentially another 12 months after that, we'll be hopefully able to start rolling out towards a national UK scheme. The eventual plan is to roll it right across the UK, England, Wales, Scotland.
Neil, you mentioned earlier in the webinar that the PDA has its own scheme for members called Paint Green, which targets grassroots action around sustainability from members and helps consumers to make better informed choices. Can you talk us a bit through how the scheme works in practice? What sort of plans you guys have for growing it further in the future?
Yes, we're asking our members to sign to the Paint Green Pledge and give us the details of how much paint in a year they're going to be recycling, how much wastage of cans they're recycling in the year. So then you can sort of monitor how many of these members, what recycling, what the volume is. And as Ben rightly said, we have 26 large national contractor members, so trying to get their volumes of what their capability of recycling is. So it's for us to gather that data. As I said, this scheme, even though not as old as the PaintCare one, it's just trying to get the members to actually sign the pledge and to actually get the information, the data onto their Paint Green card, so we've got some idea, especially going to be smaller contractors, of how much paint and cans they're actually recycling. That's something we're going to try across all of our channels over the next 12 months to try and really elevate that message out there to get more and more members to engage with the Paint Green Pledge, and also to make sure that they're fully aware of the scheme, like to repaint or Paint 360. There's also lots of little things out there that we're maybe not sure of. So some of these companies could link in with the national trade body. We're a national trade body. We have members right across the country, basically getting that message out there and then trying to grow the Paint Green initiative.
How important is it that we're tackling this from both ends of the scale? So obviously, we talked about policy need at the top end, and what you guys are doing is really very much with individual painters and decorators and smaller businesses and among your members.
Yeah, I think it all needs to, to be pulled together, make one giant jigsaw out. At the moment, I think it seems slightly fragmented. We're trying to do our little thing. There's BCF doing their little piece. So I think off the back of this group, I think we all start to work together in the future and see if we can really, really give this some clout. Hopefully then government will start to what the BCF said. They know PDA have been around long enough now supporting the painters. So I think collectively, that we're looking at Anne does and you guys do. I think we need to start in the future working more close together to make sure that this whole initiative, whether it's the paint, the recycling of cans, really has some gravitas going forward.
Yeah, just to go on what Neil was saying there in terms of working together to lobby the likes of government. I think you're bang on, Neil, with that. We all at some point in the next near future, we all need to work together. We're all trying to get to the same goal, But it's just understanding where we are and get together at some point in the future so that we can start really pushing. So we can create for the industry and everybody the solutions and answers.
Yes, obviously, for the last 10 years at least, we've been working with the BCF. These guys at the chemical side, the paint side, my members every day putting the paint on the walls. So I think the relationship between the BCF and the PDA is a really good conduit to work with, and that's something I hope to grow in the near future.
Community Repaint is our longest running community program for Resource Futures. It's so long lasting that it even predates Resource Futures as an organisation, having been set up by one of our founder businesses. The landscape around the paint industry has obviously changed immeasurably since 1992 when the first trials went out in Leeds for Community Repaint. Can you talk us through how the network is continuing to kind of evolve and adapt to sort of changing times and changing landscape?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that people are becoming gradually more aware that reusing paint is an option. I think one of our problems in this whole sector, in the sustainability sector, is you tend to find really engaged people who are already engaged in sustainability, and it's actually trying to reach out beyond the choir to the people who are friends of the choir and start reaching further afield. But I would certainly say that, at the beginning of Community Repaint, there was a small, slowly growing network, and it's certainly gathered momentum over the years. We now have, I think we've just hit 150 members. We might have gone beyond. We've got a team of, there's 4 of us, although I work part-time on the project, and we've got a dedicated team. And the project has been sponsored by Dulux for its duration, I'd say over the last 20 years or so. And that has been key to the development, because being able to have a dedicated team focusing on growing and raising the profile of the network is something that an awful lot of projects and networks don't have the benefit of. And actually, we were speaking to a team in Ireland who are setting up or have set up a paint reuse network in Ireland, and they don't have the luxury of that sort of specific industry funding, and it certainly does make it a lot harder for them. So that has enabled us to build momentum with growth. Some members drop out the other end, as people don't stay on the journey forever, because an awful lot of our members are, for example, furniture reuse organisations who have a paint offering within their setup. Some of them are uniquely for paint, but an awful lot are in the reuse sector, and paint is another string to their bow, which is a great thing, because they've already got the infrastructure set up to take in and sell items, and a team hopefully who can process and make sure that the quality of what they're passing on to the consumer is high, because it has to be said, all of the paint that's going out of big brands that you've heard of at a fraction of the cost, because it's a second-hand product. But it needs to be usable, otherwise you're just passing on the problem to the customer, which is no good. So yeah, I guess the lie of the land is reuse is more prevalent. We've certainly got some quite high-profile influencers interested in the network and the concept, and that's really helped us to gain a bit of momentum in terms of our online presence. We're in the process of a big rebrand and building a new website, so we're really looking to grow our reach. But for us, the key is to have as many members of our network as possible, so when your neighbour hears about Community Repaint, they can look it up, and there's somewhere just down the road and it is relevant to them. Whilst we're growing, it's a big old country and there's a lot of paint. So yeah, I think it's great to see the interest within the industry as well, and the fact that, let's chuck out the acronyms, the PDA and BCF are all flying the flag of sustainability. It does require action from all angles, and I think that's what we do have, which is great.
Yeah, it goes back to Ben's comment of, for what is a relatively small country, it's quite a lot of drop-off points and pick-up points are going to be needed to target everybody and make it convenient. The diversity of different types of members is really important. Getting different types of organisations, public sector and private sector and community-based is key for kind of expanding that reach as far as possible. Obviously, we've been working with, as Resource Futures, providing research and advisory support to quite a few organisations within the paint sector, manufacturers and other organisations. Kind of thinking more broadly than specific schemes, what are the key areas where we're seeing progress being made on sustainability and circularity across the sector? And how has that picture shifted over the last few years?
If I take you back a bit, for those of us who were alive then, if you look at in 2008, if you'd asked a painter and decorator to use water-based paint, you'd have probably been laughed at the time. Compared to the traditional oil-based paints, water-based paints there were poor opacity, awful durability. It looked cheap when you used it because you needed left lots of brush marks. Thing is, it didn't yellow with age, such as oil-based paint, so there were some good things. Now, I know this might not go down well with the industry, but to me, good legislation and consistent rules to create that level playing field for more sustainable products and to be able to come with the less sustainable ways of doing things. And that's including sort of accountable stewardship schemes that I think does work to stimulate innovation. So if we think about what happened in 2008, a couple of years later, 2010, VOC, volatile organic compounds, restrictions came into force, and it was a shock in that manufacturers raced to actually then produce water-based alternatives. That there are still bits of alkylate in a number of water-based paints because that's where you particularly need durability. But as the years have passed, we now think differently about water-based paints. It's just the norm now. So that's why I'm confident that those sort of good stewardship programs that are either voluntary or driven by regulation, it has to be collaborative with the industry that this is going to affect. Does work, and particularly if those funds that are raised from any sort of schemes like that, they're invested wisely and they can have an effect. But overall, the industry are taking lots of actions. It is still on a journey, but the main journey is about keeping it resilient and by building in that circularity by design, not only in terms of how paint is made, but how it's sold, how it's used, how it's recovered. It's not to have dealing with waste as something that's bolted on at the end. So there are lots of examples out there of new products and systems being designed so that waste and pollution and loss of value doesn't happen in the first place. And so rather than trying to fix the problem at the end, and people, I think manufacturers and producers of these products are prioritizing things like retaining the value by standardizing products. Makes it so much easier, makes choice much easier for people. Enabling repair, reuse and refurbishment or remanufacture of products and services, and very much working collaboratively across the sector. And so looking at that whole life cycle of that product. So if you've got a brush, it's not just thinking I'm going to make a brush, somebody else's problem to deal with what happens. It is thinking what is my responsibility and having that shared responsibility. So they are making products safer, they are making them more material sustainable, and there are new business models that are out there, such as product service system models or take-back schemes, which we've talked a lot about today. Leasing models may be a way of moving towards the future. And there are things like shared cleaning stations that we need to be thinking out, and they are there. They're a bit expensive at the moment, but I think people are engaging with them and want them there because we don't want paint down the drain. How do we help people make sure paint doesn't go down the drain, for example? We need these solutions there. Technology's there. We can't just keep asking people to do the right thing. We have to be investing in helping them make it easier, make it more convenient, so that doing the good thing is just business as usual, such as we did with VOC, getting rid of VOCs and water-based paints being the norm now.
Yeah, are there other opportunities in the current policy landscape for supporting those kind of interventions? So, for example, is EPR an option for kind of bringing in additional sustainability measures and promoting circular action?
I don't think the industry is lacking willingness to be more sustainable or to be innovative. And there is that misalignment between day-to-day business as usual practice and pressures from customers and circular systems. And so I think this is where EPR, extended producer responsibility, it's predominantly associated with packaging materials, can have a major effect. And if they're designed appropriately to look at that life cycle of a product, so it's not just addressing the packaging, but what's in packaging, for example, within this sector, that's a major opportunity to invest in these schemes. In other countries, they do have EPR schemes that relate to particular material types, not just packaging.
Been at PDA now for 17 years, and when we look at the sort of the more senior painters, you know, like you said, when the water-based paints came out, they were, oh no, we can't use these. We're going to come out of the trade. You know, they're not good. But now, as we've seen the new generation coming in, And as an example, we've just been hosting 6 apprentice comps across the country. And these young people now, they just accept the water-based paint, the operating tools, such as, so things have really, really moved on in that area, taking it away from those non-sustainable paints like the old OC smelly solvent-based paints. The young generation of our members now just seem to accept and grow and really like the new water-based products. In the last couple of weeks, they are conscious of you putting the paint not down the sink, making sure that it's been washed out correctly. And we've even got some of our members now, or even creating their own washing out tool systems where they're actually, if they're on site, they're actually trying to recycle the water from the rollers. They are really conscious that they should not be putting any water-stained paints down those drains. So that is a good point that our members are picking up on those important points.
People are always going to be resistant to change. This isn't unique to the paint industry. This is across almost every sector. It's about kind of winning over hearts and minds with a little bit of carrot, a little bit of stick, try the new norm and see how it goes.
Yeah, as a sort of, I think it's an observation and almost a question for Neil, this sort of revolution of water-based paints and how everyone turned their nose up initially. I wonder whether, could the same happen with a recycled product? I wonder what the painters and decorators of today are thinking about picking up a recycled or remanufactured paint off the shelf, and whether, in a few years' time it will be the norm and not the niche. What are your thoughts, Neil?
I think especially if a lot of our members are doing maybe contract work, so office style work, factory style work, maybe it's not a domestic job where there's so many arts out there for colour. But I think for members to be using this recycled paint at maybe a cheaper cost, which will help them to grab the deal, to grab the contract. If they're going to be using some of that recycled, which I think is great, which will be of good quality, and using that in an environmental way on some of these larger, maybe office block contracts, I think that is the way forward. I think it may work further down the line for the domestic trade. You'll have a lot of domestic decorators, but of course sometimes you'll get Mrs. Jones will want that specific colour from a certain colour chart, and if that's not available in the recyclable paint, but I think for more general painting jobs, I think it's definitely the winning streak.
I want to circle back on something that was mentioned earlier around collaboration being one of the keys that unlocks action on sustainability. How do you see that working? How do we incentivize this? How do we get government, businesses, other industry stakeholders working together for the greater good?
Initially, I mean, you've got to have a starting point, and at the moment, I think everybody's got several starting points. But what's the end goal? The end goal is that we make a sustainable industry, and whether that's not just for the paint, but it's also for the packaging. So how do you get people to work together? I'm sorry to say it, but it does revolve around money. And this isn't, there's probably only a slight bit of control that the industry has over this. Is, for example, the value of recycled plastics from paint cans, the value of the metal from the paint cans. They are so affected by geopolitical issues, as we all know right now, with what's happening elsewhere in the world. It affects our day-to-day living. It affects the manufacturers. It affects that recycler at the end point, where they've got 50 ton of plastic fixed, a rigid PP. That value of that material should be worth more. It should be, the industry, for example, or maybe the government and the industry need to work together to say we need a minimum amount of recycled content in packaging. At the moment, it's quite low. It could be higher, but until it's put in place forward by government that it has to be done, then the value of that recycled material, for example, some of the virgin plastics that are being fed in from elsewhere in the world are so cheap, it's cheaper to buy virgin material than it is to buy the recycler. And that's what needs to change. And I think we can't necessarily do anything about that as an industry together. There's major geopolitical changes that needs to be made. But going back to your question, I think ultimately things have to start paying for themselves. There's got to be value in the recycling aspect. There has to be value for everybody within the paint aspect. Can the paint be recycled? Can the manufacturers take volumes of paint? As Jude mentioned before, is there some point in the future where if we're taking paint back in at these great numbers of the 30 million litres a year, for example, we can't put all of that into reuse at the moment. We can't put all of that into remanufacture at the moment. So are there some incentives towards the manufacturers being able to take some of that and make some new products with recycled, remanufactured paint, which then starts to give it value? The simplest answer is, it's about money. It's making it worth something to everybody that's involved with that. So, but then just to rewind slightly. If we're talking about recycled paint, is it going to be more expensive or is it going to be cheaper? If it's cheaper, that's great for the PDA and all of Neil's guys, because they're getting cheaper paint, but it's got to do the same job as a new paint. So these are all the different things that have to click into place. That's certainly my observations of the last few months. There's lots of things that need to click into place for this to be a success for everybody in the future. I hope that answers the question. But yeah, get your wallet out, basically.
It'll be interesting to see what happens with recycled plastic in particular. I know there are EU rules coming in around the amount of recycled content needing to be used for certain products. It'll be interesting to see whether in the UK we follow suit on that and how ambitious we go with things like that.
Picking up on Ben's point about the leftover paint that does go to waste, because there's no way that every last drop is going to be put on walls of buildings in the UK. And following a comment from Stephen in the chat, who's one of our Community Repaint Network members, mentioned the issue at their operation where they do end up with leftover paint and then it incurs a cost to their organisation. Members of the networks are community interest companies, charities, non-profits, and actually doing this piece of work to try and encourage and engage people to reuse. If it's coming at a cost to them, then it's not going to be sustainable. But I suppose one of the glimmers of hope is PaintCare, because having the industry engaging in this reuse recycling piece of work is that, there will hopefully be some infrastructure around the disposal of larger volumes of paint, which could help those who are working within reuse. But also, we hope that our network will benefit from having more availability of the paint that's being donated into PaintCare, but also the support of PaintCare to help sell that. And then we will need to come up with a solution for the end of life, if you like, of what hasn't been able to fly off the shelf. So it is certainly something that we're looking at.
When you see the amount of plastic, this is not the recycling of the can, but when you look now, and I'm sure my age now, when you look years ago, I'm sure you'll know that all the painters would use metal paint cans, metal roller trays. Now, even going around the colleges this last few months, the amount of plastic paint kettles, plastic paint roller trays. And when I go to my local tipping near Leeds and you look into the general skip, you can see lots and lots of plastic roller trays thrown in there. So you're times that by the amount of people painting around the country buying these really, really cheap plastic paint kettles and roller trays. Whereas when I was on the tools years ago, you'll buy metal paint kettles, the metal roller trays. They could be cleaned out, burnt out, used again and again and again. Now they're buying these really cheap plastic paint kettles, use them a couple of times as the paint just peels off, and they just throw them away. So I think that it's another part of the market in our sector that really is also sadly overlooked, and trying to get back to the more sustainable painting operating tool that these guys are using every single day is something that needs to be looked into.
I think one of the other problems, Neil, is it's the makeup, it's the creation of these products. You can buy a metal paint can with a plastic handle. Okay, so as a user and a consumer, you go, okay, fine. But at what point does that get separated? Who pays for that plastic handle to come off? Why aren't we making things more sustainable? Why aren't we using just a plastic can with a plastic handle, or a metal can with just a metal handle? Because it makes the recycling process so much simpler, cheaper, and more sustainable in the long run. And before, they're not designing the products and things correctly. I suspect the paint cans that you're talking about have all been shipped in for pence per unit, and this is what we need to get away from. And inherently nothing wrong with plastic. It's the way that plastic is used, mishandled, mistreated, disposed of, that creates the problems and the bad news stories, and people not taking responsibility for how they're recycling correctly around the world and in this country. And that's where that needs to start. But if we're making quality products out of the correct materials, why shouldn't a plastic paint can last you 5 years rather than being cheaply made and it's only going to last you a few washes, or it only costs you a few pence, so it's easy to just dispose of it? In terms of the reuse sector and some of the problems that those charities have with waste and infrastructure building, ultimately, I've talked very briefly about the collection and drop-off points through the PaintCare scheme. At the moment, only 1 in 4 HWRCs collects paint. We're going to look to invest in that and try and grow that so that it's easier for people to take their paints to the HWRC sites to try and reduce that waste handling costs for the likes of a reuse centre. So part of what we're doing is trying to make it simpler so that when paint is dropped off there's a simple way to sort what's good, what's bad. And it's taken less of a journey to deal with the bad. And when I say bad, it goes back to what Neil said before, where you've got a separated block of cheese at the bottom of the pan, the water on top, you can't do anything with it. It's got to go to waste. And they're the kind of solutions that we will look to invest to in.
More than half of the network in there. Probably 50 of our members are community organisations, but we have at least 18 local authorities on board with between them around 83 household waste recycling centres. I'll do the acronym BUSTER, HWRCs. So, and at those locations, it's your local tip. They have an area which is devoted to paint, and you can go and take your paint there. It's triaged very briefly by the members on site, and they'll split probably reusable, not reusable, and then you can just go down to your local HWRC and pick up the reusable paint. With this scenario, they already have the waste management companies and the local authorities have a disposal route in place. No longer can liquids go to landfill, so this usually involves either passing on to a waste management company or drying the material out, but then it goes to incineration. We want as much reuse as possible. We're very aware that that's not going to be 100%, but yeah, with local authorities on board and these 83 recycling centres across the country, with lots more coming on board. I think we've got in the pipeline East Sussex, Anglesey and Gwynedd, Cardiff and Somerset are all going to be coming on board. This is really the answer for us to get broader coverage and provide solution for both reuse and disposal and recycling if needed, but rather it's disposed properly than it's washed out down the drain by people who don't want to pay for disposal. So the recycling centres and local authorities and waste management companies are a real key part of the community repaint network.
This person has asked, as a remanufacturer, we know how we can grow to take in bigger volumes of waste, but as we grow, we need more demand for our end products. Do you know of any feedback or demand from your members on using recycled paint, or is there a lack of awareness around recycled paint being an option?
I think it's both there. I think obviously, promoting these paints to our members is something that we can do. And I think it's just educating these members again, that if they're doing specific sorts of work, a lot of our members do commercial jobs, and I'm sure that those products will be greatly welcome for those types of work, maybe rather than a private, highly decorative finish. Work alongside these people and promote these products to our members and the wider communities. Yeah, no problem.
Do you think behaviour change happens more successfully through policy change? Do manufacturers need to be forced to be more sustainable? And is that how that becomes the norm?
Not a simple answer, actually. Behaviour change is complex. And I think we've got to look at behaviour change in terms of the bigger system. There's so many things that affect the way that people behave, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's policy, whether it's cultural beliefs, whether it's just people's values towards the environment. What I will say, though, is that we keep putting these terms like manufacturers and policymakers. These are people. All of these are people making decisions as well. So what we need is for people to really understand that and to think circularity by design. So making it easier. We may need different business models. So yes, people may be using single-use plastics at the moment, like the cheap plastic trays. Are there ways of having different business models where they don't get thrown away, they get taken back? So do you have lease schemes? So we don't actually own these things anymore, we lease them. And so when we have more sustainable products, we need to have systems where we can clean them better. We need to have good take-back schemes. We need to have reusable and more durable tools. We need them to be made out of sustainable materials in the first place. And we do need to have that infrastructure to make it easier for everybody in the value chain to engage more effectively with circularity. So yeah, I think it's not an easy question because lots of things need to change and everybody has a role. I think that's the main thing. It's a big system and it's quite complex, but everybody needs to be thinking differently. And I would always say they need to be circularity first.